You're listening to Keeping It Real with Janine, your guide to living an authentic, healthy life podcast. I'm Janine Strong, and every 2 weeks, I have a fresh conversation with inspiring, interesting, and knowledgeable people. My conversation today is with Avery Sharpe, acoustic and electric bass musician. Avery is truly an ordinary person living an extraordinary life and an inspiration. I'm thrilled to reconnect with Avery as he and my first husband, Joseph Orelli, played in a quartet together, and Avery was the best man at our wedding. So I have a fond spot in my heart for him. Some of the great musicians Avery has played with are McCoy Tyner, Archie Shepp, Art Blakey, Dizzy Gillespie, and Pat Metheny. This should be a fun conversation. Hi, Avery. How are you?
How you doing? I'm great.
Oh, it's so great to reconnect. This is one of the main things that I really like about doing the podcast is reconnecting with people that I've lost touch with.
Yeah, let's not make it another 30 years before we talk.
I think that's a really good idea. Before we start, I'd like to read just a couple of quotes that I found about you. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay, here's the first one. Regardless of the setting, Avery Sharpe always brings both exceptional musical skill and unswerving honesty to the endeavor. You can be sincere or you can be jive about what you do, he says. People might not be able to tell at first, but if you're really sincere, it will come through. And this one I thought was really nice. Forget about categories like mainstream and fusion and neo-bop. I don't even know what neo-bop is, but because if there's one thing you can say about Avery Sharpe, it's that there's no label worth hanging on him except musician. And at that, he's extraordinary. Pretty cool. There were a lot more, actually, of wonderful quotes about what a great musician you are and what a great person you are. But I just picked two. So how about starting with... you've done so much. You've played with so many great people. I'm sure you've got some great stories, which we'd love to hear. But tell us a little bit about how you got interested in music. What inspired you?
Well, first off, people always ask me that. My biggest inspiration is my mother, because she's a piano player in the Church of God in Christ, Sanctified Church, Holy Roller Church. And I'm number 6 of 8 kids.
Oh my goodness, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we're 2 years apart, up to me. And then there's 6 years between me, my baby sister, and then there's 6 years between my baby sister and my baby brother. But I was the first one to actually, got a chance to spend some time with my mother. And what people don't realize, even though I was raised my kids in Massachusetts and people identified with me with Massachusetts, I was actually born in Georgia.
You don't sound like it.
No, that's because I was my father was in the service and we did a lot of traveling.
Ah, okay.
And so we were in a lot of different places, but, I was born in Georgia in the segregated South and raised partially there. And my mother played, like I said, for a lot of churches, and people who don't really understand the churches that a lot of African Americans go to, they mostly identify black folks as being Baptist. But we are the Pentecostal, the Holy Rollers. We're the ones that you see when you see films on TV, people getting happy, speaking in tongues, rolling down the aisles and that kind of stuff, and running around the church, filled with the Spirit. So that's the way that I was raised, and those were the kind of services that I went to because I got a chance to spend a lot of time with my mother. Because, and what people don't understand about Pentecostal church, it's not that you just go to church once a week for a particular amount of time. And during that time, during the Church of God in Christ, Sunday was just a wash. You started your day Sunday, 10 a.m. was Sunday school, which lasted till about 11:30, and then 11:45 you had regular church service that went till about 2 o'clock or whenever the Lord touched the minister's heart to let you leave.
Oh wow!
And then we go home for dinner, come back at 6:30 for YPWW, which I guess would be the equivalent for Catholics. It would be catechism, Bible study. And then 8 o'clock that evening, you would have regular church service. So you'd be in church literally from almost from 10 o'clock a.m. to 10 o'clock that night.
Oh my
Then
goodness.
Monday you might be off. Tuesday you would have Tuesday night prayer. Wednesday you might have women's Bible study.
Mhm.
Thursday you would have choir rehearsal. Friday you would have regular church service. And I really dislike the Friday services because it got into my TV time. I wanted to watch the Wild Wild West, and I couldn't watch the Wild Wild West because I had to be in church. And Saturday you might be off, or there might be a special program in fellowship, and then the week would start all over again on Sunday. So that's how I spent basically my childhood. And my mother was in the church, but my father was not into the church.
Mhm.
So which when my father passed, I told my mother, I said, Mom, I know it might have been rough for you, but I was glad Dad was not into the church because it gave me a different perspective.
Mhm. Mhm.
He was very honest about things and probably more spiritual than a lot of people that I knew who were in the church. And so he would just give me the rundown, you know. She would say, well, you know, Reverend so and so, and my father said, no, Reverend so and so was at the crap table with me last night, so no, he's not. What you think he is? So you know, he kind of painted a great picture, of, you know, just more of a truthful picture. But you know, as I was saying, my mother, and in the church, you had to be involved in something, and my mother gave us all piano lessons
Mhm.
when we were young, and I started piano when I was 8 years old, and
Mm.
it kind of didn't really stick until it got to me. And the last four kids are musicians and artists. Um,
Mhm.
um, you know, so that was pretty much my start with music, and my mother always encouraging us to play and perform. And as I said before, in the church, you had to be involved in something. You couldn't just, you know, go to church. So you either
Mhm.
had to be on the usher board or you had to be in the choir. And I didn't like any of that. And at the time, there was an organ player in our church. By this time, we had moved to Springfield, Massachusetts. My father had retired from the service. And the reason why we wound up in Springfield, Massachusetts, is my when when I was 9 years old, my father got transferred to Plattsburgh, New York.
Mhm.
So I went from segregated South to Plattsburgh, New York, and you know the weather's quite different. I didn't have any white friends until I was 9 or 10 years old,
Wow.
being in Plattsburgh. And my father, it was in 1965. My father was 39 years old, had fought two wars, fought World War II in Korea,
Wow.
and had 7 kids at the time, and they wanted to send him to Vietnam.
Mm.
And he was like, "Kiss my so and so." That was in April of '65. In August of that same year, we were in Springfield,
Uh-huh.
Massachusetts. And the only reason why he went to Springfield, Massachusetts, is because my mother had done a revival in Springfield, and she told my father about Springfield, that you know Westover Air Force Base was in Chicopee, Massachusetts.
Yep.
It was still an active Air Force base, so if he retired, he could still get his benefits and still get our medical and everything like that. So we wound up in Springfield because he did not want to go back to the South. He didn't want to go back to Georgia, and you know because of the whole situation there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You know, and so that's how we wound up in Springfield.
So
And as I said,
how did you feel? Because that's like two totally different cultures. Did it take you a while to adjust? Did it feel good? Was it scary or?
well, it was a little scary, um, but you know, as black folks, we're kind of accustomed to drastic changes
Mm.
historically.
Mhm.
Um, and my father, the thing that really freaked my father out and kind of messed with me is that in the South, the lines were pretty much drawn.
Mhm.
You know, people didn't like you or there was prejudice. It was just blatant.
Mhm.
And the thing that really kind of got to us moving to Massachusetts is that it was much more subtle
Mm. Mhm.
and it wasn't overt and in your face
Got it.
for the most part. And
Mhm.
that was a little bit of an adjustment because you know if somebody doesn't like you, it's very easy to deal with them. You know,
Right.
it doesn't help that they can oppress you, but you know it's like okay, I know what time it is. Whereas in the North, you know, somebody's telling you that you're they're your friend, and then you walk down the street and suddenly you got a knife in your back, and you're like, whoa, I thought you were. So that was a bit of that. That was a bit of adjustment, mainly really for my older brothers and sisters and my father, and it was a little bit, for me because I was younger. Um, but I did like the the purported or illusion that things were equal and so forth.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, as you're talking, it struck me that that's almost more stressful than knowing where you stand. Y- y-
Yeah, it is. It
Yeah,
is. It is because
because it's
you don't know.
yeah, it's not clear. Hmm. Interesting. I
You,
had
you
never
make
thought of
you
that.
make a move, you make a move, and you think it's clear, and then suddenly you're blocked, and you're like, whoa, okay.
Hmm. Good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I think and it's enlightening for me because I never thought of that, and I think that's an important point. Okay, so you're in Springfield.
So when I was like 13, believe it or not, I started playing accordion. Don't ask me why.
Ah,
Yes.
it's an
So a
interesting
black kid,
choice.
yeah, a black kid in Massachusetts playing accordion with, it's not like you're in New Orleans. I kind of was the original Urkel, from that TV show, the accordion. Um,
Uh-huh.
but the one good thing was that I could fight, and I was a athlete, a jock. So
Hmm.
people kind of left me alone. And plus, the Sharps are a little crazy, so I played that for about 2 or 3 years, and then at 16, people always ask me, why did you start playing bass? I mean, I wish I could give some really heavy esoteric reason, but the original reason was like any adolescent boys, started being interested in girls, and I thought girls liked bass players, so
Hmm.
I thought I'd become a bass player. But that lasted for a very short time once I got into the instrument, and I said, well, forget about girls for a little while, for a minute. And and like I said, my mother was into the Church of God in Christ, but my father was not. And in the sanctified church, anything that's other than gospel music is pretty much the devil's music.
Ah, I'm not sure what the definition of a sanctified church is.
Well, going back to the Pentecostal, the speaking in tongues, being filled with the Spirit, and shouting in church, that kind of thing. Like I said, I don't know if you've ever seen examples of that.
Just in
Um,
movies and
oh,
things, but not
right,
not
like
not in person.
right. If you saw the movie The Blues Brothers
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
John Belushi, and it was kind of exaggerating the character, people flipping up and down the aisle. Not quite that. It's similar, but not not quite that exaggerated.
Uh-huh. That must have been fascinating to be a part of, though.
Well, it's really funny because being in the South, my mother did not send us, the black schools that were segregated were horrible.
Hmm.
And my older brothers and sisters, when we would move away from the South, we'd move out to the Midwest or wherever my father got stationed, and they would want to put my older brothers and sisters back a year because they found out, the Southern schools, black schools were horrible.
Hmm.
So the younger kids, myself and my, my younger siblings, my mother found a way to get around that by putting us in parochial schools, Catholic schools, because Catholic
Mm.
schools are pretty much homogeneous,
Hmm.
nationwide. So when we did move away from the South, people would not be like, "Oh, you went to a parochial school, so it's fine."
Hmm.
So that was always a challenge. I'm sorry, where were we going with this?
Well, I got you off track, but I think where you left off is with playing the bass because you thought girls liked bass, and you did that for a couple of years, and then I'm not sure where you moved on from there.
Well, let's move forward about playing electric bass. I started on electric bass at the Devil's Music. That's what we were talking
Right,
about.
right, right. Devil's music.
Sanctified. That's what we were talking
Right.
about. So anything my mother would be bringing in music, gospel music like Mahalia Jackson, Shirley
Hmm.
Caesar, James Cleveland,
Hmm.
those that type of music, and that's the type of music that she played, and that's the type of music that we had in church services. But my father, as I indicated, was not in the church, so he bought in, Duke Ellington, Count Basie. He was listening to what my older brothers and sisters were listening to, At the time it was Motown, James Brown, Wilson
Mm-hmm.
Pickett, that kind of material. He would bring that kind of material into the house. So it was a good mixture of music.
Mm-hmm.
I started a band when I was 16, but my mother was really very, I guess the word is progressive or very avant-garde, even though she was into the, very religious and into the church,
Mm-hmm.
because there were certain norms that were not acceptable in the sanctified church, the Pentecostal church, Church of God in Christ. For one thing, women couldn't wear makeup.
Mm.
Um, I, I didn't go to a movie until I got to Plattsburgh
Wow.
because we lived on the Air Force Base. But we weren't allowed to go to movies. We weren't allowed to go wherever the devil congregates. That's where we were not to
Mm.
go. Women had to wear their skirts below the knee.
Mm-hmm.
Women didn't wear pants. So there were a lot of sort of restrictions that were happening at the time. And I started playing bass also in the church. It wasn't just church on Sundays, it was all through the week.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to be involved in something. And as I indicated before, I did not like being on the usher board. I didn't like singing in the choir, although I did. So I looked around. I said, well, I'm playing bass. Nobody's playing bass. There's an organ player there. And I started playing bass. And the great thing about the Church of God in Christ or sanctified or Pentecostal churches is because there is a lot of energy there and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
spirituality there and a lot of intensity. And I think that was one of the things that I was going to say about parochial schools when I went in the South. Back then, you also had to attend mass,
Mm-hmm.
Catholic mass,
Yep.
even though we were of a different sect. And I never understood. I would ask my mother. I was, very young. I said, "Mom, I don't understand. The church is so quiet." And I was always scared every time I went into the church. It wasn't like my church, where people were, babies are crying, people are talking, the ministers the congregations are getting excited, people are speaking in tongues, people are getting happy, the music is kicking and really incredible. And my mother would just say, well, what they're teaching you is fine, but this is what we're doing is what you adhere to.
Mm-hmm.
So I started playing bass in church, and that way people left me alone as well because, I was doing the Lord's work. You're playing, you don't
Mm.
bother the musicians because you're playing music for the Lord. Although I did have my funk band that I was starting, as a teenager as well. I think they also left me alone because my older brother was a little bit more of a rebel. Kind of gave him a hard time, so I think they said, well, we better leave the Sharp boys alone because they're a little. He would talk back to the minister, hit on the minister's daughters. He was kind of a sort of a rebel.
Blaze the
And so
path
I
for
think,
you.
yeah, so it made it much easier for me. So by the time they got to me, we said, well, we'll leave these boys alone. This guy's playing bass, he's playing music for the Lord. Let's leave him alone.
Mm-hmm.
So I was playing in church and in high school and through college, and also had my bands. I guess it's what they soul music is what we used to call it back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting more and more into music and more and more into playing. Then I went to the University of Massachusetts. I was a physical education major and saw all the medical, zoology and biology, all the stuff that you had to take, which I really hated. And
Mm-hmm.
so I got out of that and was still doing a lot of playing. Actually, my group was very popular when I was an undergraduate. We made a decent amount of money and played a lot around campus.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny because I remember my oldest sister was 10 years older than me. She's a elementary school teacher, and some weeks I would make as much as she did. I was like,
Ha.
wow,
Ha ha
crazy.
ha.
My girlfriend, who's my wife now, Cheryl, we're high school sweethearts.
Oh.
She was at UMass as well. But when I went to UMass, it was really a very extraordinary period. I don't think that period has ever been duplicated in terms of the intellectual and the artistic people that we had coming through UMass at the time. At the time, Max Roach, who's like the
Mm-hmm.
father of bebop music for jazz, played with Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis. He was at the University of Massachusetts at the time teaching and living in Amherst. Archie Shupp, the great Archie Shupp, was teaching there. Reggie Workman, bass player who used to actually play with John Coltrane back in the early '60s,
Mm-hmm.
was coming up from Brooklyn and teaching bass a couple of days a week. Fred Tillis, who actually started the jazz program, Horace Boyer, who was a great gospel singer in his own right, was also one of the foremost historians on gospel music. At first, Horace Boyer and Archie Shepp took an interest in me,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought they obviously saw something in terms of talent that I wasn't seeing, and they actually spent a great deal of time helping me focus outside of the classroom and working with me. I used to go over to Archie's house and I would be playing. I first started playing upright, and he'd be playing piano, and he said, "No, man, Jimmy Garrison would have played it like this." Horace Boyer understood the whole gospel. He actually came out of the same church that I came out of, and so he understood the intricacies of the church. And he got me to play with the Voices of New Africa House, which was the gospel choir at the University of Massachusetts at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, became an economics major because I had done 2 years at UMass and decided I wanted to go into music, but they wanted me to take 8 semesters, which would have meant I would have had to go an extra 2 years. And I was like, this is crazy. I'm not doing that. So I majored in economics. My undergraduate degree is actually in economics. And, an economics degree at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst is not the same as an economics degree from Columbia. I'm not going to go work on Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
It's more radical and more political, more Marxist. And it was more abstract. And that's kind of the way my mind works.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very easy for me to get through that.
Mm-hmm.
So during that time, Max Roach, Archie Shepp, these people, are taking a great deal of interest in me. At the time, my senior year, Cheryl got pregnant with our first child.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is really strange because at the time I wanted to be a musician, even though I was an economics major, and I've always wanted to be a musician. Even when I was like 9 years old, I always saw myself as being a musician. And of course, you remember when the Beatles came to the U.S. in the
Mm-hmm.
'60s. Everybody was influenced by that, black and white. The Beatles did have an effect. I used to, when I was 9 years old, I used to walk around making up the names of my groups, what it would be, because I just knew I was going to be a musician. Even though I kind of was into sports, my father thought that I was going to be a soccer player, professional soccer player. But actually, when I went to UMass, I went as a wrestler and a soccer player.
Mm-hmm. But music is in your heart.
No, music was in my heart, and so I'm thinking, with Cheryl getting pregnant in my senior year, I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to do music, and blah blah blah, and that lasted really for about 20 minutes because I was doing a gig at Hampshire College, and she gave me the thumbs up because she was back during that time, you had to go to the doctors to get a pregnancy test. You couldn't just go
Right.
to the drugstore,
Mm-hmm.
and so she gave me a thumbs up. So I'm thinking, okay, wow, okay, she's not pregnant. And then I get off stage and she goes, no, the thumbs up was that it's positive. And so on the break, like I said, for like 20 minutes, I'm like drugged. I'm like, I'm not going to be a professional musician. I'm like, all this is going through my head. And I'm like, wait a minute. There's people who raise families who are musicians. It's funny because the perception of what people have of musicians, and there's all different types of musicians. There's pop musicians, there's rock musicians, there's jazz musicians. The bottom line, people are very artistic and maybe look at the world a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the reputation that musicians get is not the most positive.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it sometimes wanted, and some of it sometimes not wanted. But musicians, like anybody else, are human beings, and they are subject to everything else that the general public is. It's just that sometimes people who are artistic are sometimes a little bit more sensitive
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and are more perceptive,
Mm-hmm.
and especially, and I have to say this, and this is not to be braggadocious or anything, but jazz musicians are really some of the most perceptive people and some of the most intellectual people that you will know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not just saying that about myself. I'm just saying in general,
Mm-hmm.
the people that I perform with, I consider some of the most highly intelligent people that I feel are on the planet, not only as an artist, but just in general as human beings in the way that they view the world.
Mm-hmm.
I've just been fortunate enough and been awestruck that I've been around these people. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine who's actually a famous musician, TV personality, and I said, man, we're talking about some of our friends. We're like, they're crazy. And then I was like, well, man, we feel the most comfortable around them, so that must mean we're crazy too, you know. But crazy, sometimes in a not so good way, but crazy also in a good way.
Well, yeah, to
So,
me, it's like thinking, the ability to think out of the box,
well,
to
exactly.
and to feel more connected, have that sensitivity and that perceptive ability to really be more connected and to see things in more of a holistic way, or from a higher perspective.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, we're human beings, and I used to really get on some of my colleagues that, we play jazz, which is a spiritual sort of connection, but also a cerebral connection. You're playing some of the most difficult music on the planet, and you have to be able to improvise.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole thing. You don't want to play the same tune the same way you played it last night.
Right.
I used to tell my kids I have the greatest job in the world. It's dad's job to do something different every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I might be doing some of the same tunes or something, but it's my job to approach it every day. So I think, this is just my little, the way that I think, and my perception of it. I think because we have that, sometimes it gives us a different outlook of the world. As you
Sure.
say, out of the box. I think unconsciously or consciously, we think that there are no boxes, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
per se. And I used to get in discussions, as I said, I used to get in discussions with my colleagues about this, is because there's a part of our brain that's more highly developed than the average person,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll go out and do just some mundane, stupid stuff. So what is that all? I'm like, wait a
Mm-hmm.
minute. It's like, wait a minute. I just got off stage with you, and you're doing something stupid like this. It's like we just got through. But every person has that, not just artists. We all have something, a part of our brain that's more highly developed than the other person, the person next to you.
Mm-hmm.
With artists, and the argument that I make is, okay, we have this part of our brain that's more developed than the average person. Why can't we take some of those same neurons and apply to every aspect of our life? Why
Good
can't I,
question.
it's like, okay, if I can figure out what Oscar Peterson is playing, who's one of the greatest piano players ever, if I can
Mm-hmm.
figure out what he's doing, I can pretty much figure out anything. At least that's the way that I approach things. And so it's just a matter of trying to move those neurons into, how do I move that into a relationship, that those same prowess in terms of intellectual prowess that I have, how do I move that into figuring out how to function in a relationship? How do I figure out, in order to raise a family? How do I figure that out in order to lay tile? Whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is. It gives me a certain amount of confidence. If I can do that, I can pretty much do anything. And getting back to what I was saying about, when I found out that my wife Cheryl was pregnant when we were in college, I've always been on the ilk that, unless you were just dropped from heaven, you're a human being of average intelligence, average physical abilities. If a human being is doing it, that means that it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody has done it,
Right.
that's not to belittle what they've done. It's just how do I figure out how they did that?
Right.
I spend my energy not being envious or jealous or mad or anything like that. I spend my energy like, well, wait, what did they do? I can study them to see what it is that they did, because they're human like me. So that means that it can be done.
Right.
Okay, maybe might not have the talent for that, but it's something that I like, but I can develop. In other words, I'm just always, if somebody's done it, that means it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
And when Cheryl got pregnant, I was like, well, wait a minute. I know there are people who are raising families who are musicians, so that's it. It can be done. So how do you do that? A lot of people are not successful at it, and some people are. Relationships in general. I've been with Cheryl for 47 years. We've been together 47 years, and
Mm-hmm.
it's insanity. You put two people together, two different backgrounds, two different ways that they were raised. When two people are getting married, it's just not those two people who are in the room. You got about six other people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
you
Mhm.
got their parents, you got their
Yep.
grandparents, you you've got all these influences. Sometimes you'll say something in a relationship and you'll be like, dang, where the heck did that come from? You're like, oh yeah, my father used to say that to my mother. Oh yeah, my grandfather used to say that.
Mhm.
So you add in the mix of being an artist and being on the road, that creates a whole nother challenge that
Right.
that you have to work out. I'm considered a success, at what it is that I do professionally, but I've also considered a success at raising, my family. That really comes from my father. My father was very proud that he had 8 kids,
Mhm.
and he was able to take care of them. Especially even in that time of era and the whole social and economic climate, especially what that was happening for African Americans, during his time.
Mhm.
And so he was always very proud of that, and always very proud of his family. And so that had a big influence on me,
Sure.
in terms of the way I saw myself. I always saw myself as being a father, and I always tell people my father taught me how to be a man, but my mother taught me how to be a sensitive man.
Mhm.
And that
Mhm.
my father was as Cheryl says, my wife says, you've never been on the other end of you. I mean that that my father was very opinionated,
Ah.
and he was also of the ilk, if you love somebody, you tell them the truth.
Mhm.
So he wouldn't color or filter it. It's like, bam, here it is. No malice, no other ulterior motive. This is what I'm seeing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's kind of the way that I was. And my mother was like, pulled me aside and said, you can't do that. You can't be like your father to your wife or to your kids. You have to find another way to say the same thing, but not so direct, because everyone can't take that. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, my father, like I said, is the one that really taught me how to be a man, but my mother taught me how to be a more sensitive man. But I've always, getting back to what I was saying before, that I feel that you have to be able to take the best thing that you're able to do and figure out how to make that apply to every aspect of your life. And that is what I have tried to do, just as a human being. I've been around some great musicians, and some who are great musicians and great people, and some who are great musicians and not so good people.
Mhm. Who are some of the people that you feel are great musicians and great people?
One of the people I'm just about to mention is Yusef Lateef. Yusef passed actually about 3 or 4 years ago,
Mhm.
but a lot of people don't realize that Yusef would have been the same age as John Coltrane if John Coltrane had lived,
Mhm.
past 1967. Yusef was born in 1920 and died he was 93.
Mhm.
But he's known as this great sort of sage musician and great saxophone player, great artist who was one of the first people to bring like oboe, which is a classical instrument, into
Mhm.
jazz,
Mhm.
to bring other African instruments, into jazz. And I used to have discussions with him because he was. I used to tell him he was an example of what a human being should be. I mean, he was not only a great musician, but he was a great person, a very sensitive person, a very kind person, a very intellectual and very spiritual person as well. Extremely spiritual and very religious. He was a Muslim. I used to have discussions with him that it was more important to be a good person than to be a good musician.
Mhm.
I mean, you obviously want to be a great and good musician, but I think to aspire to be a great person actually helps everything. It helps your music.
Mhm.
Now, everybody's different.
Mhm.
Some may feel that they need an enhancement, be it
Mhm.
alcohol or drugs or whatever to get to whatever it is that they're trying to get to. But then that's fine. But that's just not the way that I see it.
Mhm.
I think that all great artists, it's just like any drug or anything like that. You might find a euphoria or an opening, what you think, to creativity, but at some point that door is going to close because due to the nature of the enhancement that you're using, it goes backwards. It starts to go backwards.
Mhm.
I've had challenges in my life. Never, I'm one of those people used to call me the hip square because I never did drugs. I used to tell my publicist, I said, man, I have a really boring life. I mean, never had any kind of substance abuse or no gambling, no women problems. It's just straight ahead. Very sort of somewhat of a boring life. Now, I have had challenges. We all have challenges. You lose people along the way. You watch people's health deteriorate. You watch your friends sometimes deteriorate and drink or drug themselves to death. That's not fun to watch. And
No.
personal challenges. We, my wife and I have been together 47 years. It hasn't always been smooth sailing, but those are the challenges. When you lose people close to you, that has an effect on you as well.
Hmm. Wow. So even though you have a quote unquote boring life, I can imagine that your musical life is not boring.
No,
You,
that's what I mean. No, no. I have a very exciting life, an extremely exciting life. But I always tell people I'm somewhat of a boring person, but they say they don't believe it. But I think that's how I've been able to avoid a lot of things. One of my best friends who actually was on crack and has been sober for 25 years or so.
wow.
He and I grew up together, and he said to Avery, the reason why you never got into anything, he said, into anything, he said, because you didn't like anything. He said, if it wasn't your family, your spirituality, or music, your family, friends, spirituality, and music, he says, outside of that, you didn't really like a lot of things. I said, that's not true. And he goes, think about it. And I had to really think about that.
Uh-huh.
That's what I've been focused on from day one, and I don't know why. And actually, my friends say the way that I talk now is they say, no, man, you've always talked like that. Since you were in high school, you've always talked more like an adult. And I said, well, that I attribute that to my father because I hung around my father and his friends, and my father hung around older people.
Mm-hmm.
So I really got a somewhat of a different view than sort of my peers. And plus,
Mm-hmm.
I had older brothers and sisters who told me that my peers didn't know anything. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like especially in high school, it's like nobody knows anything. Everybody's just follow the leader kind of thing, and one or two people kind of know a little bit of what's going on, but the rest of everybody else is just kind of following the leader. And everyone says that I was just kind of focused. I don't know why. I think I just was blessed to perceive the world that like that. I mean, Cheryl always accuses me of reading textbooks, because I love biographies. I love the way
Mm-hmm.
people look at things, especially given their challenges. We're all going to have challenges. It's just
Mm-hmm.
you can't get out of this.
Right.
You can't get out of this without some major challenges. That's just the way it goes.
Right.
I've never wanted to be anybody else. I just like to see how they view their challenges because that just helps me, number one, know that I can. Going back to my original premise that if a human being has done something, that means that it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm always just have enough faith and enough fortitude and thought process that I can do the same thing. I just have to study what they did or take their example.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
one thing I really always loved about my mother and my father is that they always led by example. Not my father so much, but my mother. If she said she was doing X, Y, and Z, you knew she was doing it. My father, maybe 70, 80% of the time, he might have been doing something. But that, to me, if my mother said something and she was doing it, I was like, okay, then it could be done. You can tell kids something till you're blue in the face, but they're going to go by what they see. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah. It's about action. I keep telling
Yeah.
the kids that you can say you're sorry all you want, or you didn't mean to, or whatever, but it's the action that I want to see, not,
I
not
mean,
the talk.
right. I mean, I watched, in terms of relationship, I watched how my father, treated my mother like a queen.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who are old enough to know who Lena Horne is, great
Mm-hmm.
African American actress. I mean, Lena Horne could have walked in the room, and my father would not have flinched. The only woman he would have seen is my mother.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned how to respect and treat women because I had five sisters, number one,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother made sure that
Mm-hmm.
that the males did. I watched the way my father, like I said, treated my mother like a queen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the way that my brothers, viewed their significant others, and the way my two sons now view, pretty much that I pretty much passed that along to them from my father.
Well, I think we really do learn by example more than anything else because people can say anything, right? And it's really the example, the action, what gets etched into your memory, not what people say. And I find it interesting that it sounds like you were so focused from a very young age. Maybe not focused on the same thing throughout your life, but it sounds like you really had a thread of always being pretty focused, not needing to bounce around or, not sure what you wanted to do. You sounded like you were pretty sure of yourself.
No, I never needed others to really validate me
Mm-hmm.
because, like I said, I had a large family.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people the key to my success is that I had two people who I knew loved me, my
Mm-hmm.
mother and father. The other seven people were told that they had to love me. Uh, so I mean, if you have people who love you and support you, I mean, this is my feeling. I mean, some people have that and they still don't, you know, I guess it's perception,
Mm-hmm.
because you can have that and your perception could, you can have a different kind of sensitivity. I know people, who are drug addicts or who drink a lot, and they're sensitive as well, who are
Mm-hmm.
artists and who are not artists, and those people are sensitive.
Well, sometimes I
You know,
think that's the problem is that they're overly sensitive and they're dulling that.
yeah, or they feel or perceive or see things that other people don't.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
whether it's valid or real, it doesn't matter. That is what they're seeing.
Right.
You cannot discount that.
Right.
I was just fortunate that I came out looking at the world the way that I did, and the the older I get, I don't know how that happens.
Mm-hmm.
I can't put that in a bottle and give that to anybody. I don't know. I have four kids, and they all look at the world differently. There was
Right.
eight of us. My parents said the same thing. I might have said, "Okay, that's cool." The person next to me might have said, "I don't understand it," and the person next to them would have said, "Boy, that hurt my feelings." I have no rhyme or reason why that is. Why we
Yeah.
look at the way we do.
Right. I think we're all just wired differently. We all come in wired differently. I mean, some people naturally always look at how the glass is half full, and some people naturally tend to always look at how it's half empty.
Yeah, and why is that though? We don't. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That we you can go to therapy, you can go to your minister, imam, or whatever, but I mean, I wish I knew that. And the only thing that I can do is that it's funny. All the music I've done, all the music I've written, all the music I've played, but one of my favorite tunes is "This Little Light of Mine, I'm Gonna Let It Shine," which is like
Mm-hmm.
a very simple tune, but it's so profound, that going back to also what you said about leading by example. So if you let your light shine, or if you lead by example, that to me affects people more than anything else, no matter how they view the world. Because at some point they may be doing something and then they see you doing something and it might hit. It's like, I've told my kids X, Y, and Z. And then what was funny, one of my oldest son, when he was younger, he said something that an older man had said to him, and he looks at me and smiles and he goes, "God, I wonder where I've heard that before." So letting me know it didn't really hit him until someone else said it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's not
So
unusual.
so he wasn't ready to hear it yet. And I just tell that to people all the time. Sometimes you're just not ready to hear something, or may never be ready to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'm not ready to hear things, or may never be ready to hear things.
Right.
But I think leading by example is very powerful.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's really important. And I think it's something that everybody needs to look at, especially in their families. What is the example that you are actually showing your children, your friends?
Right. Exactly.
Cool. So I think that's a really good thread that we followed there. Let's go back to your music, though. What do you have any? Let's. Do you have any fun stories? I can only imagine you played thousands of gigs with tons of different people. There must be some interesting stories of what people did you enjoy playing with most so far?
Well, obviously it would be McCoy Tyner because I played with him steadily for a 20-year period.
Okay.
And I recorded probably over 25 recordings with him.
Wow.
And he's probably one of the greatest piano players, definitely one of the greatest piano players of his generation. He's probably one of my favorite people, most favorite people. And we were together for so long that people thought there's always so many different rumors. One of the rumors was that I was McCoy's nephew. I was related to him. And I was like, well, could it be just as simple as that we just get along? Our personalities are similar.
Mm.
One of the things I learned from him, and sort of a story, is that, like I said, none of us are angels, but I think he was consistent as a leader. Very consistent, and that's very matches my personality. And I mean consistent. What I mean by consistent, I mean consistent in your demeanor, in your attitude, in your emotions. Sort of, somewhat consistent. And I think that's the thing that kind of reason why we were so together for so long. Watching him as a leader would do more by example than actually saying what it is. And I watched how he dealt with challenges because, you always have challenges on the road.
Mm-hmm.
You have family challenges, you have just being on the road. I mean, you're in different, I always say you're in a different altitude, attitude. Sometimes I would say, people would ask me what I do for a living. I say, I'm a human ping pong ball.
Yeah, I would think that'd be hard to be traveling a lot and different places and sleeping in different beds and
yeah, it's not normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not normal. You're always going to reach challenges. Flights get canceled. Gig gets canceled, whatever. And I just watching the way that he dealt with things. In other words, okay, rather than getting emotional about it, okay, we're here for plan A. Plan A just got destroyed right in front of our faces. Okay, let's go to plan B. Okay, that plan B gets destroyed. In other words, you keep going down. You're problem solving. And going back to the music, what people don't realize as an improviser, you're actually solving a problem.
Oh, how so?
You're constantly solving a problem. How do I get through these changes? Chord changes, these musical changes. How do I make this sound fresh? That's a challenge. You're solving a problem. As human beings, when you get out of bed, you're solving a problem every day, all the time. Every wakeful moment, they're not always problems, but they're always challenges and choices that you're solving. And that's one of the things that I learned from him is to the problem solving. For instance, we were going to Europe. This was back probably in the 80s, and the great Louis Hayes was on drums. Louis Hayes has played with everybody: Cannonball Adderley, Oscar Peterson, anybody you can, who's who in jazz, McCoy didn't play with. So him and McCoy, it was a trio, and I'm the young person in the group. Cat's old enough to be my father. So they kept on saying that we're going to Greece, we're going to Greece. And in my mind, when they say we're going to Europe, I think of my passport. But we've been touring in the States, and they said, okay, we're getting ready to go to Greece. We're going to Greece. And so I get into New York. We're at JFK. McCoy gets to the airport late. So we're rushing. And this is when I'm traveling with my big bass fiddle, which is a coffin case. And so I get there. I'm waiting for them. We get to the counter, and first thing McCoy says, "Okay, give me your passports." And I was like, "Oh, Greece, Europe, passport." I'm thinking we're going to Ohio or something like that. And I said, "Wow, it's not like I forgot my passport. Wasn't even thinking of my passport."
Did you even have one?
Of course I had one. I've been traveling for a long time. I just forgot it because they said we're going to Greece. If they had said we're going to Europe, I would have immediately packed my passport. But I'm thinking I'm going like to Ohio. So it didn't dawn on me to even bring my passport. And I said, McCoy, I didn't bring my passport. He didn't get upset. He just looked at me, looked at the counter, and within like 30 seconds, he says, we'll meet you there.
Hmm.
Boom, and he was gone. He said, we'll take your bass. They took my bass, he said, and they were gone. And
Oh,
I was
nice.
thinking,
You got
so
out of having to carry that.
I'm like sitting there with my mouth open thinking, they, they just left. Like, gone. They're gone. No verbiage, no nothing, no conversation. I'll just meet you there. And sure enough, I went back home, got my passport. Next day I came, took the flight. We are actually going to Greece. We are actually going to Thessaloniki.
Hmm.
So it was a long trip, a few flights, and I got there just in time for the concert. I
Wow.
didn't get a chance to change my clothes, or just clothes I had. But the way that he dealt with that
Hmm.
was so cool. It was just a funny story because I'm thinking I wasn't even thinking. It's like not like I said, like I forgot my passport. It never dawned on me to even think about bringing my passport. 'Cause
All
I'm
right.
thinking it was
Well, and it sounds like very, very level-headed. Very.
extremely level-headed.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
there's like I said, there's a lot of stories I could tell, but there's a lot of stories I couldn't tell, only to protect the guilty. But there are a lot of things a lot of fun things that do happen on the road, and a lot of challenging things that happen on the road. I mean, just a lot of things that do happen, and a lot of fun. Like I said, I do live a very exciting life, but I'm a very straight laced kind of person. I don't,
You're not out partying and
oh oh, no, I have, I have fun. I go out, sometimes promoters and stuff will take us out, but the music is enough for me.
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I'm cool. Back to the hotel and read a good book.
Well, it
That way
sounds like. Oh, go ahead.
you stay out of trouble that way as well. So
Right. Yeah. When you're talking about improvising, and I thought, wow, because with improvising, you have to be flexible and you've got to be able to really connect almost on a psychic level with the other people that you're playing with and really be in tune with the whole gestalt of everyone playing together and improvising. It must be fascinating to do that.
well, yes, it is, and that goes back to what I was saying before about the sensitivity of artists, because you do develop a certain amount of sensitivity. So in jazz, for the layperson, if I'm improvising, in other words, I may have a melody to a tune, and I've got chord changes. So once I hear the melody, I go back and make up. Really, that's what improvisation is. You're composing on the moment. You're making up your own melody,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what always fascinated me about jazz as opposed to classical, because I played, both.
Mm-hmm.
But in classical music, the whole concept is to sound like the person before you. In other words, if I'm a bass player, I'm supposed to sound like 20,000 bass players who came before me. In
Mm-hmm.
jazz, if I'm playing bass, the whole purpose is to try to find your own voice, you know.
That
And
sounds like more fun.
oh, without a doubt, to me, it's much more fun. And with improvisation, is that I'm actually supposed to hear it a split. I mean, this is like what really blows my mind about human beings. We're such complex individuals and beings that there's this whole thing that's going on when you're improvising. You actually supposed to hear it a split second. So in other words, when the audience hears me playing and hear me improvising, what they're hearing, I heard in my head a split second before that.
Oh.
So
Uh-huh.
my brain has to hear that, then it has to translate that into the physicality of me producing that, what I'm hearing. So I have to look at my instrument and how do I produce that sound that I'm hearing in my head to get it out so that everybody else hears it. Now, along with that, you've got this whole thing with your neurons happening, and the whole physiological thing that's happening with you. But then there's also uh, the sort of esoteric, the spiritual that's kind of happening all within that, and the energy that you're putting out. and that the energy that the audience is receiving and then sending that energy back to you. So it becomes like sort of reciprocal,
Mm-hmm.
sort of circular.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's one of the most fascinating things about improvisation, and it can go anywhere. There's no judgment. There's no, you're open.
Right, right.
You're open. It's like, okay, somebody's playing something you might be inspired by, you might hear it, and you might be the main one who's soloing, and somebody might play something, and you're like, oh, let me go that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're soloing, and then the people who are supporting you are saying, oh, he's going in that direction, so let me play this or play this chord or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's really somewhat of a fascinating thing. I think Cornel West said it best. Jazz music, which was basically created by African Americans, music that was created, which is it's a democratic process. In
Mm-hmm.
that, if I'm soloing, the other people around me are supporting me and letting me have my voice.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes almost like a town meeting where
Mm-hmm.
you stand up, you voice what it is that you have to say. People will support you or not support you, but
Mm-hmm.
at least you have a voice. And it's been said that the people who had the least amount of democratic rights created the most democratic music
Hmm.
in the world.
Interesting. It also sounds to me like the epitome of being in the flow.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Or as athletes, we call it in the zone.
In the zone, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, at least that's where you try to get to. Some people are not great players and don't sound like that. But those who are at a certain level, yes, that happens. And I think it was funny. Louis Hayes, great drummer, we just got through playing, and people came backstage, and this one person said, "Wow, that was fantastic! But that was, did I feel like a really special moment?" And
Uh-huh.
Louis looks at me and looks at the person. And he goes, "Every moment is special." He said, "You're hearing it for the first time. We hear it all the time, and we're always, so it's always special to us. And we're always trying to improve on it. So every night is special."
Cool. Huh. That sounds like a good place to end. I like that. I just had a thought. Is there an album that you particularly like that I could put a link to that maybe they could download on iTunes or something, or listen to snippets of, that I could put a link to on the website so that people could hear a little bit of your talent?
Wow, that's like trying to ask a mother which child they like the best.
Well, it could be a couple. Sorry to corner you like this.
You never tell a child who's your favorite.
Right, right. Just something that's, kind of exemplary of your, the way you play and express yourself.
Maybe an old record. Maybe Family Values.
Family values.
It's Extended Family 3.
Okay. And is that something that would be on iTunes that I can find the link for and put it
Yeah, you
on
can
the
find it,
website?
or even on YouTube.
Ah, okay.
All
Okay.
my stuff is on YouTube. Just type me up on YouTube, and all my stuff will come up.
Oh, okay. So people can easily do that, and they just have to remember Sharp is with an E on the end. And
Exactly.
I'll put some links on the website too. Um, this has been awesome. Is there anything you'd like to wrap up with?
No, I just hope I didn't go off too much on tangents, which I sometimes do. I
No,
think
we
that's gotten.
we we do tangents here. So, well, this has been really awesome connecting with you. Do you have a new record coming up, or any gigs or anything?
I'll be with my trio in Long Island for a fundraiser for the John Coltrane's home was in Long Island, New York, and I think they were going to tear it down several years ago, so they formed this nonprofit society to help restore it.
Oh, nice.
So I'll be doing a fundraiser for that, and then actually I'm going to New Orleans with Archie Shupp in May,
Oh,
and
fun.
I've got in talks now with a local symphony about doing another project with them mixing jazz with classical music with choirs and everything.
Oh, nice. Sounds like
Uh,
fun.
And I've got a new record that I'm going to be recording this August,
Hmm.
which will be out in 2019, as well as the piece that I'm writing for orchestra.
Oh, nice. You are a busy boy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Never a dull moment. Never a dull. That's that's why I'm boring, because there's never a dull moment.
Oh, that's great. Well, and how could people connect with you? Do you have a website or anything that and what would that be?
www.averysharpe with an E, SHARPE.com,
Okay.
or they can Google me, Avery Sharpe, bass, and a number of stuff will come up.
Okay. Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Avery. It's been really nice chatting with you, and it's been wonderful to reconnect.
Definitely, definitely.
Thank you for listening, and thank you so much, Avery Sharpe, for taking time out of your busy life to share your story with us. It really has been fun for me. The podcast website is realjanine.com, and remember that's JANEAN. You can listen and download episodes. There are links to guest web pages, photos, and you can sign up for the Real Janine bi-weekly newsletter to keep up on new episodes, archives, life updates, and always a healthy recipe. To subscribe to Keeping It Real with Janine, go to iTunes or your favorite podcast provider. Do you know a few people who would enjoy my conversation with Avery Sharpe? Perhaps there's someone who's had a desire to be a musician and needs a little more inspiration. I'll bet you do. Please share the love. Thanks for listening. Take care and be well.